The United States President Barack Obama has hailed a new chapter in the United States' relations with Cuba, announcing moves to normalize diplomatic and economic ties. Mr. Obama said Washington's current approach was outdated and the changes were the most significant in the United States' policy towards Cuba in 50 years. Cuban President Raul Castro said he welcomed the shift in a TV address. The move includes the release of the United States contractor Alan Gross and 3 Cubans held in the United States. Wednesday's announcements follow more than a year of secret talks in Canada and at the Vatican, directly involving Pope Francis. Thus, Cuba relations have remained frozen since the early 1960s, when the United States broke off diplomatic relations and imposed a trade embargo after Cuba's revolution led to communism. Respectful that the United States is looking to open an embassy in Havana in the coming months, Mr. Obama said on Wednesday. Raul Castro, we have agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations. Alan Gross was accompanied by his wife Judy at a press conference in Washington. Mr. Obama and Mr. Castro met a year ago at Nelson Mandela's funeral. The plans set out in a White House statement also include reviewing the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, easing a travel ban for the United States citizens, easing financial restrictions, increasing telecommunications links, efforts to lift the 54-year-old trade embargo. Mr. Castro said the changes were something Cuba had been pressing for a long time. Ever since my election, I have reiterated on many occasions our preparedness to hold a respectful dialogue with the government of the United States based on sovereign equality, he said. Freed the United States contractor Alan Gross. It's good to be home. President Castro urged Washington to lift a trade and economic embargo imposed on the communist-run island, a move that can only be made by Congress. Republican Senator Marco Rubio has criticized the new United States policy, saying it would do nothing to address the issues of Cuba's political system and human rights record. The United States and Cuba, 54 years since trade embargo imposed $1.1 trillion cost to Cuban economy, cost to the United States economy $1.2 billion a year. The United States presidents since 1960, 11 Cuban presidents since 1960. 3 source: the United States Chamber of Commerce, Cuba Foreign Ministry. Analysis: BBC's Barbara Plett ushered in Washington. The release of Alan Gross was essential to any diplomatic breakthrough between the United States and Cuba, but internal political changes in both countries had already created a climate where détente was conceivable. In the United States, demographic shifts in Miami have softened the political influence of the anti-Castro exiles. Younger Cuban Americans and recent immigrants are more open to engagement. In Cuba, limited economic reforms carried out by Raul Castro have begun to relax the tight grip of the state and pique the interest of American business. Cuba has stopped exporting revolution to Latin America. In fact, it's mediating the most successful attempt so far to achieve peace between the Colombian government and FARC rebels, making its inclusion on the United States list of states that sponsor terrorism look increasingly outdated. Latin American countries think so. They've reintegrated Cuba into regional bodies by inviting it to the Summit of the Americas in April. President Obama is also expected to attend, which perhaps help focus his mind as he ponders how to shape his legacy during his remaining 2 years in office. Mr. Gross, facing the camera in a blue shirt, flew back from Cuba on a United States government plane. Mr. Gross' arrest and imprisonment had previously undermined attempts to thaw diplomatic relations between the two countries. Speaking at a news conference on Wednesday, he thanked his family and supporters, saying, "It was crucial to my survival knowing that I was not forgotten." He described the policy shift as a game changer. Mr. Gross was smiling ear to ear, a few of his teeth missing, the BBC's Suzanne Chianpour reports. Our correspondent says the family spokesperson had warned the press about Mr. Gross' missing teeth before he walked out, and for a man who had been held captive for 5 years, there was a certain youthful candor about his concern for appearance. Earlier, the 65-year-old arrived at Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, where he was met by the United States Secretary of State John Kerry and other officials. Mr. Kerry said he was looking forward to being the first Secretary of State in 60 years to visit Cuba. Mr. Gross spent 5 years behind bars after being accused of subversion, while on a mission to bring internet services to Jewish community groups in Cuba. The United States and Cuba say he was freed on humanitarian grounds. The Cuban government has also freed an unnamed American intelligence officer who had been in jail in Cuba for nearly 20 years. 3 Cubans jailed in the United States have arrived back in Cuba. They are part of the so-called Cuban Five, who the United States prosecutors said had sought to infiltrate the United States military bases and spied on Cuban exiles in Florida. 2 of them had recently been allowed to return to Cuba after finishing their sentences. Key dates: 1959, Fidel Castro and his guerrilla army defeat the US-backed Cuban regime of Fulgencio Batista. 1960–1961, Cuba nationalizes the United States businesses without compensation. The United States breaks off diplomatic relations and imposes a trade embargo in response. 2001, 5 Cubans, dubbed the Cuban Five, are jailed in Miami for spying. 2008, Raul Castro becomes Cuban President. 2009, the United States citizen Raul Gross detained in Cuba accused of spying. 2011, one of the Cuban Five, René Gonzalez, is freed by the United States. December 2013, the United States President Barack Obama and Raul Castro shake hands at Nelson Mandela's funeral, the first such public gesture since 1959.